Chapter 3, Evolution, Identifying the Different Players. In the attempt to bridge the gaps of understanding and communication between religious Christians and secular thinkers, it becomes necessary at some point to tackle the subject of evolution. Broadly speaking, almost everyone, including the Christians who uphold belief in the literal interpretation of Genesis, which is 6 days and 6,000 years ago, accepts some form of evolution according to its most basic definition, quote, change over time. The problems break down with the questions of how much things change, how long it takes, and who or what directs the change. The biblical literists, such as the scientists and apologists at Answers in Genesis, home of the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, actually support models of very rapid evolution, since they are working on models based on a short time span. In contrast with the neo-Darwinist position made famous by people such as Richard Dawkins and Stephen Jay Gould, these Young Earth Creationists, which will henceforth be referred to as YEC, and many of the Old Earth Creationists, or OEC, believe that the information that drives the process of evolution is front-loaded, along with the laws of physics, chemistry, and other natural forces that the scientific method allows us to test. This is largely compatible with the ideas brought forth by proponents of the intelligent design movement, ID, such as Dr. Stephen Meyer, author of the books Darwin's Doubt and The Return of the God Hypothesis. ID points out the similarities between things like DNA and computer code, emphasizing that these, quote, languages store and convey information in a way that necessitates intelligence to understand, which precludes the possibility of arising from unintelligent sources. Rather than appealing to special revelation or religious assumptions, the ID movement questions some of the more basic assumptions of the neo-Darwinian theory by highlighting unanswered problems like irreducible complexity, which is a concept popularized by Michael Behe in the book Darwin's Black Box, and the problem of abiogenesis, or how life can emerge from non-life, which is a topic explored in great depth by Dr. James Tour. Other thinkers, such as Dr. Michael Levin, explore the mechanisms of change within the broadly mainstream scientific community. By avoiding questions about the validity of the basic evolutionary theory, discoveries continually arise indicating how much greater complexity in regards to how changes occur than what the early Darwinists had imagined. These discoveries include promising breakthroughs in the field of epigenetics that studies how adaptations in genes are passed on intergenerationally, a topic I have discussed personally with Dr. von Mancha, in theories that explore the origins of consciousness. There is also a significant gap in understanding between the scientists familiar with these cutting-edge discoveries and the average subscriber to the basic evolutionary theory. Many people learn about evolution in grade school through textbooks that approximate the basic theory in an almost mythological format. But society regularly condemns Christians for teaching Bible stories to children as truth through illustrated and animated materials. Yet most children are first introduced to the ideas of evolution in the very same manner, through the grade school textbooks and children's programming on PBS. As it stands, people on all sides resort to tribalistic sense-making tools when determining who to trust and who to ignore. The positive or negative answer to the question, quote, do you believe in evolution, will often end the discussion immediately, depending on who is asking and who is responding. This is a truly dismal basis on which to base our dialogue, for all parties involved. For those who have accepted the typical evolutionary theory on a basic level, unless they've entered into fields of biology, chemistry, or other related areas of work and study, they are likely less well informed than the adherents of the YEC, OEC, or ID, who have usually taken the time to study and weigh not only the basic arguments, but the more granular details in at least some areas of interest, such as biology or geology. Many Christians who hold these views often underestimate the knowledge and understanding of people who work within those various fields. While the basic premise of Darwinism have not changed, many of the explanatory theories within biology have been tested and updated according to a strict adherence to the scientific method. The big questions may be off the table, but scientists, especially within medicine, know things empirically that an internet apologist does not. The problem that the tribal mindset makes it very difficult for people to make use of the research or observations that arise from another camp. For the Christians, this can lead to an anti-intellectual mindset that causes a rejection of life-saving technology or practices. For the materialists, they are robbed of a sufficient ethical framework in which to do research. These two trajectories really start to cause chaos in the soft sciences. Fields like psychology or sociology, or even things like economics and political theory, have a weak basis in materialism and Darwinism. These things can be argued in discussion, but they also have a profound impact on how we live our lives. As an example, the quote, manosphere relies heavily on evolutionary psychology to optimize how men attract women. It assumes, according to the underlying theory, that because men are naturally inclined to having multiple partners and are more attracted to younger women, that being a Chad player is the quote, best lifestyle. But there are many indications that the happiest men are those in monogamous marriages, and marriages are strengthened by the commitment to fidelity and sexual self-control. Evolutionary psychology has no answer for why someone ends up happier by denying their natural inclination, because that provides no basis for their values. On the other end of the spectrum, Christians who accept the Darwinian theory as presented find that their long-held values become difficult to defend. The idea of universal human rights is rooted in the Imago Dei. But if humans are simply evolved primates, then they have to wrestle with what it means to be made in the image of God. We are separated from the apes by our ability to use language and make tools, and our theory of mind, but not all humans possess those abilities. And if that's what it means to be made in the image of God, then some humans cease to be truly human. Evolving acceptance of religion. In some ways, the scientific community's loyalty to Darwinism is truly admirable. If Meyer's arguments about the information contained in DNA, or Behe's concept of irreducible complexity, had arisen in the 19th century, when it was believed that a cell consisted of, quote, undifferentiated protoplasm, then Darwin's theories would be quickly abandoned. A few generations of observations regarding Darwin's finches would have revealed that epigenetic changes occur predictably and efficiently in the offspring creatures faced with difficult circumstances, that revert to prior forms when the environment stabilizes. The continuing allure of Darwin's theory is not truly based on substantial evidence or an interference to the best explanation, but rather on its philosophical and metaphysical underpinnings. Darwin's theory provided the necessary framework to accept the death of God, but as people have continued to appeal to science to fill the void, the explanatory power of Darwin's theory has expanded to godlike proportions. As the scientific method revealed greater and greater levels of complexity, in even the simplest forms and processes of life, the neo-Darwinists have discarded old explanations for how complexity arises and have come up with new ones. With the advent of Dawkins' The Selfish Gene, the sincere scientists that followed in his footsteps have marveled at the wisdom and knowledge present within these tiny building blocks of genetic information. Brett Weinstein and his wife, Heather Heying, the authors of A Hunter's Guide to the 21st Century, regularly point to, quote, the genes, and their desires and wills and language, that bears a striking resemblance to the way the ancient writers depicted, quote, the gods. Much like the Greek Olympiads, these genes are capricious and unpredictable, yet powerful enough to overthrow our wills and impose their desires on our bodies and our actions. Yet somehow, perhaps from studying the body of historical evidence regarding the civilizational successes and failures, the authors find a basis for humanity to defy the will of, quote, the genes, to secure our future survival. While, quote, the genes cannot tell us why we should deny our basic urges in favor of traditional sexual and societal mores, the evidence seems to indicate that the preservation of humanity as a whole requires us to do so. Thus, while the early adopters of Darwinism, such as Thomas Henry Huxley, were eager to dispose of religion, the Darwinian project now regards religious belief as an evolutionary necessity, as the majority of humans have not adapted to survive life without it. This means that from those within the scientific community, it is increasingly acceptable to affirm the goodness of a religious tradition. Even if they are unable to hold up the Bible as any kind of authority, thinkers like Jordan Peterson can marvel at its wisdom as evidence of an emergent artifact from the Jungian, quote, collective unconscious, which itself emerges from, quote, the genes. The points of contention. While this newfound acceptance of a religious text and beliefs is far from universal, it now places the ball back in the court of the Christians who do accept the authority of Scripture over the Darwinian origin story. While there is little hurdle in getting Christians to accept the idea of, quote, change over time, there are a few specific points of contention between the Darwinian model of origins and the biblical one. First is the uniqueness of man. Without some ontological distinction between animals and humans, it becomes very difficult to create a basis for ethics and morality. The evolutionary drive to propel genes into the future is not a sufficient basis for human rights. It also brings into question the validity of our ability to reason and observe the world around us. We have no idea how our genes may be deceiving us. Second is the distinction between change within one type of species, which can create a huge variety of dogs that all descended from wolves, and the changes from one species to another, such as fish to reptiles, birds, and mammals. The biggest hurdles are that which differentiates man from apes, for the reasons stated above, and the concept of a universal common ancestry, the idea that all life derives from a single organism. Third is the directionality of the change over time. The Darwinian presumption is that complexity emerges from simplicity, and that the process of natural selection is driving us towards more advanced, or at least more robust, forms of life. Yet much of the historical data that we have collected shows that the genetics tend towards degradation over time. Despite claims of, quote, overwhelming evidence by people on both sides of these issues, the reality is that we cannot know for certain what happened in the past, however far or recent we believe it to be. We all live by faith to some degree or another, but what we believe about these origins affects the way that we live our lives. It determines our goals and our futures. Even for those who left science behind after high school, beliefs on the topic of origins will affect your approach to many important issues like dating, economics, politics, and medicine. The evolutionary camp is beginning to recognize the need for moral and ethical systems, and they have done so largely through the application of their Darwinian research. Christians need to recognize that even if we reject some of the basic assumptions, research done, quote, in good faith, should affirm the nature of reality as it is revealed in Scripture, and can provide insight into the how and the why of our past. Potential solutions. Much of the rest of this book argues from the standpoint that the Bible contains a vast wealth of wisdom that can apply to many areas of our lives, especially those where Darwinian and scientific models make no judgment, such as values, ethics, and morality. In this section, I'm going to offer some potential solutions to help Christians identify and accept the important truths that can be discovered through the scientific method, even if it assumes an evolutionary point of view, and to try to offer different perspectives that can answer the points of contention listed above. For those who are skeptical of people who rely primarily on non-scientific methods for navigating life, hopefully this section will serve as an olive branch, to recognize that I'm trying to help make connections. Even though I have my own skepticisms towards Darwinian evolution, I do believe that the scientific method provides truthful results when faithfully executed. First, on the issue of the uniqueness of man, this is an area where the atheist and the skeptic needs to provide answers rather than the Christian. We all intuitively believe that there is something unique about man that separates him from the animals, and only the most extreme ideologies like radical antinatalism actually follow the materialist and Darwinian assumptions to their natural conclusion. The metaphysical solution to UCA. Second, on the issue of universal common ancestry, the easiest way for Christians to accept the possibility of this idea is to think outside the theological box. One of the most widely held and unquestioned assumptions in Christian theology is that of creation ex nihilo, the creation out of nothing. This teaching is important philosophically to differentiate Christian monotheism from pantheism, where creation is a part of God, and panentheism, where creation exists within God, by providing a distinction between creator and creation. But creation, quote, out of nothing, is a misnomer. It's an inconceivable concept. Francis Schaeffer articulates this problem well. Remember Jean-Paul Sartre's statement that the basic philosophic question is that something is there rather than nothing being there? The first basic answer is that everything that exists has come from absolutely nothing. In other words, you begin with nothing. Now, to hold this view, it must be absolutely nothing. It must be what I call nothing, nothing. It cannot be nothing something or something nothing. If one is to accept this answer, it must be nothing, nothing, which means there must be no energy, no mass, no motion, and no personality. My description of nothing, nothing runs like this. Suppose we had a very black blackboard which had never been used. And on this blackboard we drew a circle, and inside that circle there was everything that was, and there was nothing within that circle. Then we erased the circle. This is nothing, nothing. You must not let anybody say he's giving an answer beginning with nothing and then really begin with something: energy, mass, motion, or personality. That would be something, and something is not nothing. The truth is, I have never heard this argument sustained, for it is unthinkable that all that is now has come out of utter nothing. But theoretically, that is the first possible answer. The problem for the Christian is that we are often just as tempted to substitute a, quote, something nothing for the nothing described above, the mind of God, or his creative will, or his eternal decree. But these solutions do not clearly delineate the distinction between creator and creation, other than by making creation contingent rather than necessary, and pantheism and panentheism become default positions. But the Bible and Christianity do have sufficient answers for the creator-creation distinction. Paul's words to the Colossian church explains the nature of Christ's relationship with creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross.
Christ is the source of creation and its panentheistic arena, until the separation between creator and creation, which is already complete from his perspective, though not yet from our perspective within time. As creator of all things, visible and invisible, time and space and the laws of math and physics are all parts of creation. The act of creation itself is then not, quote, out of nothing, but out of Christ, quote, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Creation is what spills forth from this kenosis, the emptying of Christ's nature. Blood and water do spill forth from Christ at the moment of his death, an event that still marks our division of history. But from the perspective of the creator of time, Christ is, quote, the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. And even if, as the distinction is made in many translations, we insist that it is the names, quote, written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain, there is no distinction in reality. Time is a part of creation, and thus, while we experience it in a linear fashion, God does not create it in a linear fashion. From the Aristotelian viewpoint, the final cause, the new heavens and the new earth described in Revelation, come into being simultaneously with the formal cause, the names written in the book of life, through the efficient cause, the death of Christ on the cross, and the material cause, the body and blood of Christ, the substance of creation. While this metaphysical solution will cause many atheists to recoil, consider that it describes the only way in which we, as humans, have ever successfully created anything, from the first tool to the Large Hadron Collider.
Personality, intelligence, and purpose must unite with matter to form or create anything understandable. The personal and purposeful model of creation can also be defended from a more traditional evolutionary standpoint if some breakthrough provides evidence that makes time travel plausible, with more evolved beings from the future causing events that set our evolutionary history in motion. But more importantly, this model allows us to change our perceptions on two important concepts about the material universe and biological life. First, by positing that a human being, Jesus Christ, provides the substance of material reality through his body, organic biological matter becomes the primary source of dead inorganic matter. Second, by assuming a complex multicellular life form as the first living being, the theory of universal common descent becomes a much more tenable hypothesis. With the creation of xenobots, Dr. Michael Levin and his collaborators have demonstrated the possibility of creating simple, single-celled creatures from the cells of complex, multicellular frogs. So far, there has been no testable means of proving that single-celled organisms can evolve to become multicellular, complex creatures. While I am unaware of any research into the idea that a human could be the universal common ancestor, the Human Genome Project did reveal that while humans are the most intelligent creatures on the planet, their genetic material is simpler than that of many others, including creatures like mice. But more DNA does not make more advanced creatures. When the genetic codes of many creatures have been studied, it is revealed that often long chains of complex genes are necessary to produce very specific traits. The wolf is the ancestor of all dogs, and his genes are much more resilient than the inbred subspecies we keep as pets. To reduce wolf genes into something like a pug, more information is added with sections of genes copied over and over, the genetic analog of run-on sentences. Each time you add, quote, and then, with descriptive details, the thing becomes more particular and less general. Thus, all dog breeds are contained within the wolf, but the genetic, quote, description of the wolf is far simpler. The telos of evolution. Finally, this reworking of UCA can lead us to a better understanding of the direction of the evolutionary process. As stated earlier, everyone agrees that things change over time. Some creationists, in their insistence that change occurs primarily due to a loss of genetic information, only see the direction of change as one of decline and entropy. But the evolution from the Garden of Eden to the New Jerusalem is a process of complexification and sophistication. And while there may be an increase of genetic disorders, our knowledge and ability to repair and overcome such deficiencies is on an upward trajectory. For most of history, pregnancy was extremely dangerous for women, and surviving infancy and childhood required a great stroke of luck. Infant mortality and pregnancy-related deaths have become rare tragedies, and our ability to help infants born prematurely is beginning to approach the first half of pregnancy. These are, quote, evolutionary miracles that increase the, quote, fitness of humanity drastically, not to mention the myriad of solutions that have been developed to make people cope with chronic conditions throughout adulthood. My solution is to view the progress of, quote, evolution through what I call the reverse recapitulation theory. This comes from an abandoned idea about how the normal development of life mimics the process of evolution as it was imagined in the 19th century. The theory of recapitulation, also called the biogenetic law or the embryological parallelism, often expressed using Ernst Haeckel's phrase, ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. It's a historical hypothesis that the development of an embryo of an animal from fertilization to gestation, or hatching, the ontogeny, goes through the stages resembling or representing successive adult stages in the evolution of an animal's remote ancestors, phylogeny. It was formulated in the 1820s by Etienne Serres based on the work of Johann Friedrich Meckel, after whom it is known as the Meckel-Serres law. Haeckel's idea was that as an embryo grows, it mimics the progression imagined by Darwin's tree of life, first looking like a fish, then a reptile, a bird, and a mammal, before finally developing into its final form. This idea was due to the presence of features that looked like gill slits and vestigial tails occurring in the embryos of many creatures that did not share such features in maturity. Upon further observation, Haeckel noticed that the pattern he imagined was not so clear-cut, and he actually resorted to doctoring illusions that appeared in many printed works. The idea that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny was something many evolutionary advocates wanted to be true, and so it was spread among popular works on Darwinism long after it was known to be false by the scientific community. I propose that Haeckel's suggestion actually works quite well in reverse, that phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. As both humans and animals evolve collectively over time, they progress through stages of maturation, from seed to sapling to leaf-bearing, fruit-bearing, until they can produce the seed of something new. Under humanity's guidance, plants and animals have relinquished the immaturity and inefficiency of a defensive posture have thrived. The high points in history of human civilization are characterized by the flourishing of trust and goodwill. It is only when people revert to lower forms of selfishness, treachery, and corruptions that civilizations begin to wane or fail to develop, as in the cannibalistic tribes of Papua New Guinea. The idea of nature as, quote, red in tooth and claw, has largely been debunked as cooperation, symbiosis, and accommodations between species have been discovered over and over in all environments. The belief that our own bloody history was part of a natural process, when introduced in the 19th century, did not cause people to celebrate the advancements we had made, but to revert to that primal state of mind. It's unfortunate, but not surprising. The biblical narrative sheds light on the patterns of civilizational development through the lens of the Israelites. God shepherds them from nomadic herdsmen to civilizational laborers, to conquering settlers, to a kingdom of priests. Yet all along the upward trajectory of their civilizational development, the Israelites suffer setbacks and regressions. They fall into sin, idolatry, slavery, and they need to be rescued again. But the setbacks are not complete. Each time they integrate the lessons they have learned from their mistakes and come back wiser. Their latest return, after nearly 2,000 years of exile, has led them to create one of the most advanced nations in the world. They have begun transforming the desert into a garden, and the technologies they have developed could someday do the same for the Sahara, the Gobi, and the Australian outback. The hope of the evolutionary vision, when freed from the pessimism of the reductist materialism, was always an Edenic vision. The question is, where does that vision come from? Not from, quote, the genes, nor from the simple extrapolation of natural goodness and beauty stumbled across by our ancestors. The vision comes from the Creator. It is the true telos of evolution, and it has a final cause, the reunion of God and man in the new heavens and the new earth. The hope of seeing this vision fulfilled provides a sufficient reason to willingly surrender to the very worst example of nature, red in tooth and claw, the human animal stripped of all reason, wielding the scourge and spikes of Roman persecution. The God-man allowed his flesh to be consumed by the beast with teeth and iron, the ultimate corruption of the walled garden, the evil empire. Selfish genes do not willingly release their grip on life, nor are they aware of serving any, quote, two worlds mythology, emerging from a collective unconscious. Only for, quote, the joy set before him could this be done. The seeds of human civilization, creation, cultivation, and the bonds of affection did not arise as a, quote, evolutionary compromise to increase the odds of beta males depositing their genetic material. They are the thing itself. The joy that defies the logic of the survival of the fittest is the true telos of evolution. The joy of fathers who delight in their children, and husbands who cherish their wives of brothers that wrestle to celebrate their strength, who marvel at their sister's beauty, not to compete over scarce resources, but to enjoy the wonder of creation. The regressions of atheism, materialism, and the sexual revolution have knocked humanity off the path that caused us to flourish. Many people are now discovering the limits of the Darwinian worldview. As they reach out and trust, they discover the Creator who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us. A power is far greater than selfish genes. By discovering the joy of our true telos, we can steer the course of evolution back towards the purpose of reality, and when our goals and actions align with our true purpose, wonders will never cease.